Hello and welcome everyone to another Cubase versus Bitwig video, and this time we are going to look at stock plugins. But before we are going to do that, I will read some of this Wikipedia article to you. Monolithic application. In software engineering, a monolithic application is a single unified software application which is self-contained, independent from other applications, but typically lacks flexibility. Keep that in mind during this little demonstration. So here we have a little drum break. And the first example that I want to show you is Quadrafuzz. I think Quadrafuzz is one of the best plugins of all of Cubase stock plugins. I deliberately chose a rather subtle setting and also gain matched the signal with dry. This is a multiband distortion plugin. You can dial in different amounts of distortion, different distortion types. You can change the crossover frequencies. You can change the stereo width, the output gain, the panning and the mix of each band. And you can dial in a gate if you want to. I don't. It's not all perfect. For example, if you are tweaking the distortion type, you might find that this second button sounds pretty cool on the break, but then when you unsolo it again, you notice that there is some serious phasing going on. So unfortunately, you cannot mix the different tube styles without getting huge artifacts. Also, this mode, it generally has a nice vibe, but it also has a little bit of, in Germany we would say, krisseln im sound. I don't know if there is an English word for that, but it just, you cannot push it hard even though you would like to do that. It's a bit of a problem, so that's why I had to use tube here. Tape also works fine. So yeah, there are different distortion modes. They don't all work together, but they have different flavors. That's nice, right? What more could you want? So here we are in Bitwig now, and we also have a break here. And as you can see, I already loaded the saturator. It has a nice fat sound. It is just an oversampled wave shaper. Not much to it, but just what you need sometimes. However, it is single band. So why am I even showing you that? Isn't this like worse than Quadrafuzz multiband layout? It is, but you can just say multiband FX3 and put a saturator into every single band. And that's not even all you can do. You can also load other types of distortion plugins that come with Bitwig, like Bit8, which is a bit crusher, and some other stuff. You are not limited to distortion plugins, of course. You can also load filters or whatever else you want. So it's like you don't just have the multiband option for distortion, you have it for everything. So at that point, we could go back to our little website of monolithic applications. Quadrafuzz is self-contained because just by itself you can use it. It's nice. It has a good sound if you don't push it too hard. Independent from other applications, sure, you can just load it and it will do its thing. You know what it is good for. You can load it in the situations where it's good, but typically lacks flexibility. Yeah, it does so. You cannot do anything else with it than the thing that it was designed for. And it wasn't designed for a lot of stuff. At least not compared to just loading a multiband container and putting a lot of stuff into it, like whatever is in your plugin folder basically. So let's go on with the next example. Here we have a little snare and 3 different delays. These delays are called mono delay, stereo delay and ping pong delay. You have 3 different delays for 3 different kinds of delay applications. Here in Bitwig, there are also different kinds of delays, but the only one that you basically need is Delay Plus. Delay Plus comes with a mono mode, with a stereo mode, and with 2 different ping pong modes. So let's check out what the mono delay sounds like right now. Okay, that was a pretty normal 8th delay with a little bit of feedback. But what was that? I turned down the high cut by 3/4 and it still wasn't very muffled. The reason for that is because the filters in this plugin have a range from 1.2K to 20K with a center of 10K. But 10K and 20K sounds almost the same. Human hearing doesn't work linearly. We perceive frequencies in pitch, and 10K and 20K is almost the same pitch. See, so what is this about? Did the programmers at Steinberg not know about pitch when they made this plugin? Did they make the whole software Cubase and never learned about pitch? What's the deal with this? How low do you have to go for this to have a significant effect? This is the lowest you can go, and it's still not very low. Like, you can still hear most of the signal, it's just slightly muffled. And this filter is also not in the filter path of the delay, which would at least have been a little bit interesting. It is just a post filter. You could have accomplished the same thing by just loading an equalizer after the filter. And it would have even sounded better, because this filter just sounds better, has 12 dB per octave and not this crappy 6 dB per octave that is probably implemented in mono delay. And it's not just mono delay. Stereo delay, ping pong delay, all the delays that were made by Steinberg have this issue. So let's check out the situation in Bitwig, shall we? When we drag this parameter, we can see its current value. The lowest value is 156 Hz, which is considerably lower. The highest value is also 20K. Also notice how the label is just labeled much nicer. Instead of writing out the whole number, you can just see it in kilohertz, and when you go to the lower values in hertz, so that it's more readable. And in the center we have around 1.8K, which is low enough to sound different from full blast. And now this is really muffled. We can just instantiate a plugin in the feedback path of the filter. And of course, we are living a little bit dangerously then, but it sounds much more interesting immediately. We can also dial in a little bit of diffusion if we want to. Yeah, whatever we want. Here we are back at the Wikipedia page of monolithic applications. Are Cubase delays self-contained? I wouldn't even say so. They lack so many features that you cannot even use them by themselves. Are they independent from other applications? I also wouldn't say so, because they are so bad that they force you to get other plugins to get the job done. And they lack flexibility. You cannot even change the layout of the stereo configuration within one delay, but you have to manage 3 different delays. And of course, you cannot put things into the feedback path, not even a little bit of diffusion. Here we are in the ping pong delay. And now let's try to go to the dotted rates. Okay, we got the triplets. The dotted rates are back here. Nice. It's a little bit unusual that this parameter is sorted by normal, triplet and then dotted, instead of by like the length of the delay, like most delays or things that have a rate parameter, but okay. What I like about the ping pong delay is that it gives you a little bit of a macro control about the spatial width, because this actually does multiple things at the same time, manages the gaining between the cross-linked delay stuff, which is nice. The stereo delay, however, is not so nice in that regard. It gives you 2 parallel delays and you have to manage the panning knob yourself if you wanted to do anything interesting, and you cannot cross-feed the delays with each other, even though this would have totally made sense in a context like this. You basically have to set up 2 delays completely individually from each other and hope that it kind of makes make sense. Here in Bitwig, if we wanted to have two delays in parallel, we could just spawn an FX layer container and drag the delay in there and then copy the delay. And now we have two different delays, one for each layer. I could also add many more layers if I wanted to. I don't though. And of course, I can add even more plugins or modules into each of these layers if I want to. So same as with the multiband thing, this just makes the workflow of routing things much easier. Cubase just implemented the stereo delay so that they have a hack and an excuse for not updating their bad routing system. Now I'll put this to the side and instead drag a copy of the break down here into my delay track to play around with the rate. Let's find out how Bitwig Delay Plus handles that. First of all, we can go much lower with the delay parameter, which is nice because down here we have the ability to create nice little comp filter artifacts. But also, rate changes don't sound discontinuous, they just crossfade from one rate to another. And if you think that this is not even fun enough, you can change it to repitch in the inspector, and now it does this. It repitches, and you can change the update rate at which it repitches, which is also pretty cool. But let's not go too much into detail. What I'm trying to say is Steinberg didn't put detail into their plugins when they made them. They must have noticed it at some point. It's impossible that they didn't. And they actively decided to keep this crap the way it is. Let it sink in. Let's move on to the next topic. You might not be very interested in delays. Maybe you are a mixing engineer and you are more interested in plugins or features that let you do something that can help in the mix. One thing that you might sometimes want to do is making sure that drums sound really clean by putting a gate or an expander on the drums. So here is Cubase Gate on this break. Okay, what's going on, you might be wondering. We are not in live mode. There is a distinction between live and not live. So let's assume that the not live mode, the studio mode, let's call it studio mode, uses look ahead to compensate for the attack. But it doesn't do that. It just doesn't do that. The attack is already fairly short, but it just doesn't do that. It sounds washed out. You cannot hear the transient anymore. It's just a terrible gate. What's there more to say? It's not just the lack of a proper look ahead feature, which is definitely needed in a gate. It's also that there is no post gain parameter, because you can just hear how this changes the overall volume of the signal. So you can't really compare the signals anymore. And there is no ratio and knee setting. I know this is not an expander, it's a gate, but still we are in 2023. No one wants to hear those excuses. The Bitwig gate already sounds better out of the box. But what happens when we dial in attack? First of all, the range is much better. If you notice, the value is just 1 millisecond when you already dialed it in so hard. The reason for that is because this is the kind of range where you want to have precision in a gate. And after that, it can get a little bit less precise. However, we do hear the problem that when there is too much attack, it smears the transient. Here in Bitwig, it can be solved, for example, like this. First of all, we make a tool device. We do nothing with that. We just use it later for routing. Now we add a time shift module and we give it the exact offset of our attack parameter or something around that value. So 18.4 negative delay. Now as a device input, we choose the time shift as our sidechain input. And now we just have to make sure with an audio receiver that we get the audio from after the tool so that it's not time shifted. And as you can clearly hear now, we have a setting that has a lot of attack, but it still retains the transient. The depth parameter is just the same as the range parameter in Cubase. This gate also doesn't have a ratio or a knee control, which is a shame, but it's still better than the gate in Cubase. But just real quickly, before we go on with the comparison between Cubase and Bitwig, let's load the dynamics module of kilohertz. What we dialed in here with the curve is the ratio, and this is the knee. You can also see it visualized here on the blue curve. The knee makes sure that the transition between ratio and no compression is a little smoother. And this thing doesn't even have look ahead, but it still sounds good just because you have ratio and knee control. So this is definitely a must-have feature in a good gate nowadays. We are done with the gate. Next up we got this sound here. It's a nice sound, but let's say we want it to be a little bit more washed out so we can put it into the background with chorus modulation. I mean, it's not completely bad per se, but it's also just a vibrato mixed with a dry signal, maybe two vibratos. I don't know, it doesn't sound very special. It's not the most beautiful chorus modulation I ever heard. It's just the most basic chorus imaginable. A lot of plugins in Cubase feel to me like that. They feel to me like the developers just try to get the most basic DSP down into a plugin and then basically tell to the customer, you know, we made the VST interface, so now you can just buy stuff from third-party developers. We don't have to provide that for you. You can go and buy stuff. And that was a sentiment that was definitely very helpful in the past because it made sure that all of the different doors of this world now support VST, and we actually have whole communities of people who passionately discuss VST plugins because of that. So thanks to Steinberg, we have this now, but it is just not contemporary anymore. We need good plugins indoors already. That's just the standard nowadays. And Steinberg is one of the only developers that just doesn't accept it. Okay, I loaded this atmospheric sound here, and now let's load Chorus Plus. We can hear this sounds very similar to the chorus in Cubase. It just uses a triangle wave to create a vibrato that can be mixed with a dry signal. It just gives you a single tone control instead of two filters, which is a little bit easier. But the big thing here is you have 3 more chorus modes and they all have a very different flavor. And they sound really good. At least that was an example where Bitwig didn't have more flexibility. So yeah, in this case, monolithic application, both of them. But Bitwig, better. And now I want to talk about the step filter, because that's actually a plugin that I always loved to use in Cubase for years, and I did so much stuff with it. It can transform this into this. Which sounds really nice in my opinion. It is a step sequencer that is mapped to the cutoff and the resonance of a filter, and you can move between low pass, band pass and high pass. You can also set a bass frequency and resonance and a little bit of glide that describes how fast it moves from one step to the next one. This is all pretty cool, but there is a little bit of a problem here. This project has swing. As you can see, 35% swing, and you cannot dial in the swing in this plugin. So basically this plugin is only useful when you don't use swing. So whoever made the swing feature for Cubase has not talked to the person who made the step filter. And yeah, it really shows that some of the developers really didn't communicate well with each other. Also, it's really fiddly. I might accidentally drag one down here just by keeping the drag for a little bit too long. It can easily happen that you accidentally destroy your settings. Yeah, one of my favorite plugins in Cubase, but still no good workflow. So let's check out how it is in Bitwig, shall we? Here we have a little bit of a vowel filter, which is already much more interesting than simply low pass, band pass and stuff. And there we can load a step sequencer as a modulator. We can load modulators on all parameters and on all containers. And of course we can assign them to any parameters. We can change the number of steps, because I might not always want to have the full range of steps like in step filter in Cubase. It's often a little bit annoying that you have to decide for so many steps when all you want to do is just a little catchy sequence. Of course, you can also change the speed. I could go on and on like that. We could also talk about how Groove Agent just has way too many pages for something that should just solve making a bunch of drums or many other things. But I think this video is already long enough. I'm aware that this is the worst Cubase versus Bitwig video I ever made. This is just straight up bullying against Steinberg, but I think they kinda deserved it because I was a Cubase user for a long time. And in that whole time, they could have said, okay, this year we will just upgrade our plugins. You know, Bitwig has the opposite problem. They always only upgrade their plugins. They never fix bugs. And this DAW has a lot of bugs where you would just say this is a basic DAW feature, why is it buggy? Cubase doesn't have that, and we can make a video about that as well. But when it comes to stock plugins, that's not Cubase strength. And I don't wanna hear it another time from anyone in any Facebook group or something like that, that Cubase allegedly doesn't have worse plugins than Bitwig. The plugins are so much worse. There is just no argument against that. Like, what would the argument even be? Please, if anyone knows an argument, make it. Make a video or write a text. I will read it or watch it and I will consider it. Try it. Try making an argument. One last word here. Most of Bitwig's community is very much against third-party plugins. They are often very full of themselves and just feel like, oh yeah, I have all these containers and the plugins are already so cool by themselves. I don't need anything else. But that's bullshit. You always need something else. This makes much more sense when you route MIDI into it. Anyway, there are infinitely many dimensions of sound, and that's why it's important that we have third-party plugins and third-party plugin developers. I'm not only saying that because I am a third-party plugin developer myself, I already said the same thing before. And Steinberg was the one who came up with the idea that plugins could be made by third-party plugin developers. Steinberg are responsible for this glorious evolution of sound. I pay respect to Steinberg for this. Steinberg, you are awesome for that. But you are not awesome for your plugins. Fix them.